The Elves are one of the most ancient races in Middle-earth. They came into being well before men, hobbits, ents, orcs, and even the dwarves, although the latter bit could be argued. And when they were born, not only were gods still walking the earth, but they even had their own kingdoms. In the far west, there was the land of Amun, with its majestic kingdom of Valinor. There, the Valar gods and their servants, the Maiar, rested after completing the construction of Middle-earth. And in the northeast, underneath tons of stone and dirt, Melkor, the first Dark Lord, ruled. There, in his dungeon fortress of Autumno, he was joined by a host of fallen gods, the demons known as Balrogs and other monsters. It was into this world that the elves were born, and with so much danger, we often wonder who discovered the elves. Just exactly who was the first god to make contact with them? That's what we're going to answer today. But let me ask you this first. Do you know where the elves first woke up? According to Tolkien, they were asleep in the far east of Middle-earth, alongside a lake called Cuivianen. And if you know anything about the history of Middle-earth, you can already guess who might have been the first god to discover them. Because at this time, during the years of the trees, the Valar didn't live in Middle-earth. As we said earlier, they lived in Valinor, which was on a completely different continent. In the preceding period, the Valar had fought a great war against Melkor, and they kinda lost. You see, the Valar had spent thousands of years preparing Middle-earth for the arrival of elves and men, and once they completed the job, they retreated to an island in the middle of the world for some much-needed R&R, but while they were there, Melkor and his army of demons invaded. They created a secret fortress, which we know as Autumno, and corrupted all of the Valar gods' hard work. Melkor and his demons toppled the mountains, filled in the oceans, and turned the animals that lived in harmony into horrifying monsters. The Valar gods wanted to get revenge on Melkor, or at least stop him from ruining Middle-earth any more than he had already had. But they couldn't. If they waged war against Melkor, then they would threaten destroying the entire planet. And perhaps Melkor knew that. So, the Valar gods decided to retreat into the continent of Amun. And Melkor was allowed to stay in Middle-earth, where he continued to populate it with fell creatures, much like the fell beast the Nazgul rode, and the Watcher in front of Durin's door. Few of the Valar ever ventured into Middle-earth again. And so, the first god that found the elves was a dark one, Melkor. Whether he directly discovered them or one of the lesser gods in his service, like Sauron or Gothmog, is unknown. But once Melkor became aware of them, he dedicated his efforts to finding out the secrets of their life. Melkor couldn't create any sentient creatures with his own powers, since that right was reserved for the supreme creator of the universe, who they knew as Eru Ilúvatar. Melkor could only corrupt creatures that already existed. So that's what he did. He sent his monsters and spies to kidnap the elves and take them back to his fortresses. It's from these early elves and his experiments on them that orcs most likely came to being, although Tolkien later changed his mind on the topic. But besides the Dark Lord Morgoth, which is what the elves knew Melkor as, there was one other god that came to find them. He was a Valar, and one of the most noble among their order, Orome the Hunter, the one god who spent the most time in Middle-earth during Melkor's reign, found the elves while hunting, and he was riding around the far eastern parts of Middle-earth when he suddenly heard singing. He followed the noise until he saw all of the elves standing before him, and Orome was shocked. This, after all, was the moment that he and the other gods of Valinor had waited for so long. They had spent thousands of years building the world, and many more years waiting idly, just for these elves to come into being. And now that they were here, Orome couldn't take his eyes off of them. He would spend a lot of time with the early elves. He even gave them one of their first names, Eldar, which means people of the stars. After discovering the elves and learning that Melkor had already terrorized them for years, Orome went to the other Valar on Valinor to urge them to fight. Even though they had hoped to avoid conflict with Melkor because they might cause more harm than good, they eventually realized there was no choice. If they were to fulfill their mission, they needed to rid Middle-earth of Morgoth and his monsters for good. I hope you enjoyed this Lord of the Rings video. Leave a like if you did, subscribe if you are new here, and I will see you in the next one. Until then,
Stupid little hobbitses!